I guess probably. Yeah, we'll have to find a place to pack people. There might be people sitting on laps. Yeah, we could take a second car. That actually might work out okay because I forgot we were going today, and I still have my golf clubs in my truck. So that third row of seats is going to be real interesting. Technically, I think it could fit sideways, but I'm not positive on that. So yeah, if you have a car and you're willing to drive as well, that you can definitely come. That means we have room for other people who might want to get shot. I told you about this place the other day, right? Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So we're leaving 11:20 right after class. So we may or may not be back later. Let's see. Okay, so homework assignment was to be able to parse things like, did we update our simple? All right, so we want to be able to do arrays now, right? Okay, so idea is that, for example, inside of 3, this guy should be able to hold a collection of stuff. Or maybe we have, and it's always a collection of objects. So we'll put 3 in there. And we'll just, so I don't have to come up with new object names, we'll just pretend like they're all the same object. That guy's now an array, so we have a different value type. So let's now go into, so we have, let's see, we have our JSON. Oh, here's our cave parser. This is where all the magic kind of happens. All right, and down here, this is our get value type for the kind of value we're dealing with. So this is going to increment down the line. If we see a double quote, it's a string. If we see an opening curly brace, it's an object. Else if, this dot the JSON dot char at pause is equal to a square bracket, then return array, something like that. All right, so this guy will now advertise what kind of object we are what kind of value we're about to read in. All right, and here's all of our functions for the different kinds of values. Here's getting a string value, here's getting a number value, this is getting an object value. So let's go ahead and write a get array value. Private JSON array get array value. All right, so this guy is going to keep reading stuff in until it hits that closing, the closing square bracket. And let's then look at our current implementation of JSON Array. Okay, we haven't done much with it. So a JSON Array is a, that's JSON variable. Here's a JSON string variable, which is a JSON variable. So really our JSON Array, we probably should rename JSON Array variable. That sound about right? Because we have a JSON object variable, a JSON string variable, a JSON number variable. So we probably want to call this guy a JSON refactor, rename, JSON array variable. All right, and we'll have this guy go ahead and extend our normal JSON variable so he gets the value stuff. So this is a JSON, where right here. So he's going to extend a JSON variable, except his private value is actually going to be an array of JSON object variables, right? JSON object variables. Let me go in here. Actually, let's think about that though. Is it actually an object variable? This is an object with a bunch of name value pairs in it. This is an object with a bunch of name value pairs in it. These guys are actually just the value side of a JSON object variable. Because usually we would have something like blah is that. Does that make sense? So we don't actually have the name side of that. So what we can do is we can actually repurpose our JSON object variables. Do we actually use JSON objects here? Oh, JSON object is a collection. Okay, yeah. So now we need a JSON. See, this is okay. This guy's going to be a collection of JSON objects, not a collection of JSON object variables. So we're good. We already have the thing we need. This is going to be a private, do we call it value? JSON object array called value. Is that what we named it in all the other ones? Yep, value. Yeah, I'm lost on where I was. Array variable, there we go. Object, JSON, object, array value. All right, and let's go ahead and create our constructor, JSON array variable. All right, and this guy's going to take in a string name. And we'll go ahead and say super name, pass our name, and we'll say this dot value is equal to, and this is a capital O for object, JSON object, yep. Value will be a new JSON object array, and just like our other thing, we're probably limited to 50. Our arrays can hold 50 objects as a max or something like that. Which means that we're also then going to have to keep track of, what do we call it inside of JSON object? Called it cur size, so let's have it be the same thing. So private int cur size, and we'll say this dot cur size is equal to 0. Okay. So we have that. Now, and what's this guy complaining about? Oh, we just haven't implemented those methods. Click it more better this time. There we go. Okay. See, we just saw the purpose of having that method in there because it just reminded us that we needed it, because all of our JSON variables have an abstract method called display that we talked about last time. Okay, and abstract says children of this guy have to implement him. And we just saw that in action. It told us we had to implement this display method. All right, so a JSON array variable is going to have a name associated with it, and then we're going to initialize a JSON object array so it can hold all of our objects, and we're going to limit that to 50. So now we need to have the ability to add an object to this array, right? So we're going to go ahead and say public void add JSON object. And this guy will take in a JSON object obj, and we'll say this dot value at bucket this dot cur size is equal to obj, and then we'll say this dot cur size plus plus. Add 1 to the number of elements we're currently storing, right? So now a JSON array gets set up. It has a name just like any other plain Jane JSON variable. It initializes a container for holding a bunch of JSON objects, as well as a variable for counting how many objects are in there. We've given it the ability where we can throw a JSON object at it, and he'll go ahead and collect that object and add it to his array. Now we also need to go through and have a display method for this guy, And if we look at our display method for like string bar, it prints out that this guy's a string, and here's his name, and here's his value. If we look at object, what does the display method do? I'm going to actually steal the implementation for that. We'll modify it for our JSON array variable. So this guy's going to say JSON Array, and we're going to say num objects is equal to this dot cur size. Then we're going to spin through all of our objects, and for each one of those guys in our it looks like we didn't call it value in JSON Object Array. We called it the variables. JSON Object is a value. Oh, it's JSON Object that had the variables in it. Got it. This dot. I know. JSON Object Array or Object Variable. Oh, it was this guy that had the display method. That's the wrong kind of dude. Because this is a JSON object. This is actually an object variable whose display method looks like this. So yeah, we can leverage this. It's fine. So we'll print out this is a JSON array. The number of objects that are in this array is this. Let's go through all of those objects. For each one, we're going to go ahead and tell the object to display itself. So we'll say this dot value at bucket I dot display. So we'll tell each object to go ahead and display itself that this array holds. Okay. Fair enough. So that's our JSON array variable. So now we know how to detect that the value is an array. We know how to build a JSON array. We already knew how to build JSON objects, JSON object variables, but we don't need JSON object variables. We need JSON objects. So this guy holds a JSON object array where every object knows how to display itself. All right. So now we just need to actually throw JSON objects into our array. So let's go back to our Cave parser. We got all our Legos organized that we're going to need to solve this. So get array value. If we call this guy, that must mean we're sitting at that opening square bracket, right? Just like in get object value. So we're going to have a pretty similar thing to what we had here. In fact, for right now, why don't we just steal this implementation. Steal it there. All right, so as long as we're not off the end of it, let's go ahead and let's advance to the opening square bracket. All right, so that will get us to the beginning of this array. All right, that's if we know that we're sitting. Actually, we can go ahead and we can advance to the curly brace. In actuality, if I have an array, I know there's at least one object in that array. If we go back to our simple JSON here, I've already detected that the value is of that type. Okay, so I'm sitting, I'm sitting right here. I can go ahead and just advance to the beginning of the object. Right? Okay. So, and then I can start reading in this object. So I know there's at least one object in here. Do I already have a way of getting a JSON object? Let's go back into our Cave parser. So we can add a variable to an object. But the problem with doing that, problem with adding a variable is what? It requires a name-value pair, where the value is going to be a JSON object. All right, so the variable that we're adding here is whatever's returned by get variable. Well, get variable returns full name value pairs. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking just for the value part of a JSON object variable. All right, so let's see. Do we have, so let's look at get variable. Cave parser. Oh, perfect. I want, well, let me just search for an actual function. Here's get variable. This guy's going to return a JSON variable. It figures out, here's the whole name part. We don't need that. Then we figure out the value type. We know what our value type is right now, correct? We know our value type is going to be an object because that's what JSON arrays are filled with, is objects. So that's this guy right here. So we have the ability to get an object value. Okay, and then we can throw it into the variable and build it. So we already have the ability to get an object value, and we want to just keep getting object values as long as there's commas, right? So go back down here to, or up here, wherever it is. JSON array variable. So as long as we still have stuff to get, we can just say, if we're in here, we know we're going to go ahead and need a JSON array variable. So let's go ahead and build ourselves a JSON array variable. Do we call this guy anything important in our objects? No, let's just call it the array. All right, and this guy is going to, actually it's going to be a JSON array who's going to call this? So down here in get variable, if it's an object, we create the object. And then we're going to add a variable to that object that we get from get variable. That's our object variable. So we have the name in here already. So let's go ahead and write this piece because it'll make the other piece make more sense. So else if type dot equals array. If that's true, if we're looking at an array, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to create a JSON object or JSON array variable. Okay, and the JSON array variable, let's call it the variable. It's going to be a new JSON array variable, and this guy only takes in a name. Okay, so let's go up here to our JSON array variable. He only requires a name to build himself. And then he initializes his internal array. So go back in here. What is this guy screaming about? Oh, I think we just have to save in one of these things. JSON array, oh, variables, there we go, thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and create our variable array. And then, as long as we still have commas, we're going to go ahead and start reading in our, object. But instead of looking for commas, what we could look for is closing square bracket, right? So while this dot cur pause, and really we're interested in this dot the JSON at bucket, actually that's a string, so dot char at this dot cur pause. Well, that guy is not equal to a closing square bracket. Okay. What are we going to do? Okay, we're going to have to modify that a little bit, but as long as he's not a closing square bracket, What we really probably want to ask is does a comma come is the next comma before the closing square bracket? But let's write the logic inside of here first. So what do we want to do? We want to say the variable dot add JSON object this dot get object value. That knows how to get an object value for us. So what does get object value do? So right before this, he goes through, advances to the opening curly brace. We might already be there. He creates a blank object, and then while there's still commas, so while there's a comma, advance to it, grab the variable, add it to our object, and then advance past the closing curly brace. All right, so that's what reading in an object looks like. Wouldn't reading in an array be pretty similar to that? So we could advance to the opening curly brace, build our array. In fact, we're writing this inside of, yeah, let's just write it up here. Let's just create a function pretty similar to this one. Actually, we don't want to do that because that would require we make a JSON array object. We probably don't want that, or just a JSON array. So I'm actually just going to steal this code. We'll come down here. So as long as we're not off the end of our JSON string, we'll go ahead and advance to our opening square bracket. That gets us to that guarantees we're at the beginning of our array. Right? Once we're at the beginning of our array, we want to go ahead and get a JSON object. So we'll say, what is it? The variable dot add JSON object this dot get object value. That'll read in at the very least the single JSON object that must exist inside of our array. We've guaranteed our JSON arrays must have an object in it. They could have more than one, but they have to have at least one. So this will read past that. So this will get our first object, and we'll go ahead and add it to our array. Then, as long as there's still commas, advance to that comma, and then basically do this line. So over and over and over again, advance to the next comma, add a JSON object value to our array that we're currently building. Finally, we're going to advance past the closing square bracket of our array and return our variable. And our variable is a JSON variable, which was our JSON array variable we built up here. Make sense? Okay, so let's think about our string here and what it currently does, and let's see what it's currently screaming about. Get array variable. So here, oh, we were in the middle of writing this. Oh, I decided that we weren't going to do this. We thought about doing it the same as an object value, but we don't actually need that. So all we're doing now is we're saying, if we need an array, go ahead and build a blank array variable, giving its initial name, and then fill it up with all the objects that we find. Ultimately, return that variable. And realistically, we probably, well, no, we can put it inside there. This, I was going to say we could return it outside of this while loop. Like this. We know the variable exists here. We know we're going to fill it here. We're ultimately going to get to this line here and return it. The difference is how we handled it, because we took that code from getting our object. Otherwise, this guy's going to scream that we might not actually return a variable in here inside this else if. So we'll build our variable. We're guaranteed to have a blank variable here. As human beings, we know we're going to get inside this. We know that we've guaranteed that we'll have at least one JSON object inside of our code. So we'll go through, fill it up, fill it up, fill it up. Then in the end, we'll return the array we just built. Okay? And that'll be what gets returned by this is get variable. Okay. So let's go into our code here. So we already saw it works here, it works here, it works here. Now we get to this guy here. We should detect that it's an array value. Okay. And then in the end, don't we display everything? This is not running the right program. Did I have this problem one other time? Would I close Eclipse and... That was something from last night. All right, so let's go to this driver. Go ahead and run this guy. So here's our JSON array, although it only found one object, so we certainly have a bug here. It read in the whole object. It just got all the pieces as if it were a single JSON object. AB, AB, AB. So it got all the pieces, but it didn't actually grab our objects. And it's probably because our getJSON object is written generically before, where now we need it to skip past the commas. Let's just look at our JSON object, and this is actually going to be a good example because fixing one thing could break something else. So here's our get object value. So this advances to the opening curly brace, and then eventually advances past the next closing curly brace. But my feeling is so while we're saying this dot exists, comma, we're advancing to it. So I think we're actually skipping past our closing curly braces for each of those individual objects because we're advancing to the comma that's beyond that. So what I mean is once we're in here, we're processing this object, processing this object, processing this object, and we're handling these parts fine inside here. But then we ask, is there another comma? And there is. So what do? We zip right past that closing curly brace for that object and get to that comma. Make sense? So that's why it's putting all these things inside of one object, because it's not actually noticing the end dudes for our objects until the very end when it has one before a comma. Or it doesn't find another comma inside the context of this guy. So we need to ask that question, are there more objects a little bit differently than we are right now? So right now we're asking the question, does a comma exist? And the answer is, yes, a comma exists, but we didn't tell you to finish this guy first. All right, so if we are currently, get to our Cave Parser. So here's our get array. Start there, end there, grab our one object. All right, so this is the part that's breaking or giving us the wrong result. It says If there is another comma, advance to it. So what we really probably want to say is if there's a so grab an object, does get object value not stop us at the end of an object? Maybe that's the problem. No, it gets us past it. Oh, this is the problem. It's get object value. Before, we didn't have object values sitting right next to each other like they have now. So we wrote this correctly before, but now it's written with a different, we have to modify this to work for all object type values because we might call this guy multiple times in a row. So we start with an opening curly brace, we build a blank object, we add our single variable. As long as there's still commas, add more variables. But the issue is that we can't just say as long as there's still commas. We really need to say as long as the next comma comes before the next curly brace. Then we have another guy to add. Otherwise, as it currently stands, as we're walking through our JSON string, let's go in here, I'm in the process of building this object. So I just built the first name value pair in here for my JSON object. Then I say, does another comma exist? Yes, it does. So we build our second variable in our JSON array. Then I ask, does another comma exist? Yes, it does. So I advance to that comma, and then I start building. Actually, do we get? Because we get the variable, it advances to the double quote. So that's how we skip this second guy here. So we're hopping from here to here without doing anything, without noticing that an object just ended and another object started. So we need to handle that transition a little bit better to work for arrays. So go back into CaveParser. So this is no longer going to cut it. We now need to ask, does a comma come before a closing curly brace? So while that exists, well, we'll just write it generically, I guess. So private Boolean char before char, and this guy will take char A and a char B, and he's going to return true if A occurs next before B. All right, so we're going to just walk our string. So we'll say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than this dot. Actually, we don't want to start j at 0. We're going to start at this dot. Cur pause. Keep going as long as this dot, the JSON dot, as I is less than the length, I plus plus. As we're walking through here, if we hit a B before we hit an A, we can go ahead and return false. So if this dot, the JSON dot char at I is equal to whatever B holds, return false. Else if this dot, the JSON dot char at I is equal to A, return true. And then as our catch-all, we'll just return false down here. Even though we know we're only going to call this guy in situations where we know we're going to have a comma. For example, we're asking, does a comma come before a closing curly brace? If it does, keep doing this stuff. So this will allow us to ask that question. So if we're walking through our string, starting at our cur pause, we're asking if A was a comma and B was a closing curly brace. If I'm walking along and the first thing I bump into is a closing curly brace, then I would return false because a comma does not occur before a closing curly brace. Make sense? So this allows me to handle these situations. If I'm sitting right at the end of this guy, I can ask, does a comma come before a closing curly brace? The answer is no, because I'll bump into that closing curly brace before I bump into that comma. Make sense? So I'll get a false, which tells me I'm at the end of an object. Okay? So now that we have that, char before char, inside of our get object value, we're not really asking if a comma exists. We're really asking is if this dot char before char, comma, closing curly brace. Okay? If that's true, if a comma comes before another curly brace, go ahead and advance to the comma, read in the next variable. Otherwise, burn past the end of this object and return the object we just finished building. And we could probably go ahead and take that same logic for safety reasons and build it around our arrays. So right now we're saying while there exists the comma, what we're really saying is while this dot char before char, comma before our closing array. Keep doing this stuff. Check something real quick because I felt like I might have put a semicolon at the end of that line up there. Nope, I didn't. All right, so let's run that now. Let's see if it started getting it. So here's our JSON array. Okay, well, we're better. It thinks we have 4 objects, so we're breaking near the end of it now. So we have our apple banana, we have our apple banana, we have our apple banana. So now the problem is at the very end of that guy, we're walking off the end of our string. So we get to this last object, and I ask myself, does a comma come before closing curly brace? The answer's, or closing a square bracket, the answer is no. So we should end our array. So do I walk past that? I should. And we should read in this last guy. All right, so it has to be this transition from that last object. I move past that dude there, and for some reason I'm creating a new object. It thinks I have 4 objects. So when I get here, it's asking, does a comma come before? Let's go back into this. Let's go ahead and practice our debugger. So we'll put in our breakpoint there. So we know our problem is involving our array, right? So we'll go ahead and put a breakpoint inside of this else if our array, and let's go ahead and walk through the collection of those 3 objects, and we should be able to see where it's breaking down. Where's my little bug? There he is. Okay, so I guess I need to hit play the first time to get rolling. Where's my buttons? Oh, they're up here. There we go. All right, so we're in our array, so we'll go ahead and create our array variable. Got that. We should be good there, and this is our step over, right? Okay, so as long as we have something to read in, let's go ahead and burn past that opening square bracket. We'll go ahead and grab our first object. It's actually interesting. Why did that read in a I think the problem is actually right at the very beginning. Our first object we got actually has null in it. So let's go back. Run it through the debugger again. Get it to that place. Burn past that. Get our first object value. All right, so that is concerning. So we grab our one variable for that. So let's see what this guy looks like. This is the object we're building. Size is 2. We got the A in the apple. The debugger just kind of, did it just jump this? We didn't actually see it. So we'll return that object. So now our array here, this is the variable. Oh, we're adding it right here, so I need to jump down one more line. Currently has a cur size of 1. The name of this guy is 3. It currently has, oh, that's for the name. Here's the value in this guy. We currently have one JSON object in there, size 2, and his values are A and B. Okay, so that looks reasonable enough. So we successfully grabbed the first object. So now we're going to ask the question, is there another object in here? That is there a comma? Does a comma come up before a closing square bracket? Ask that question. Yes, it does. So what are we going to do? We're going to advance to the next comma. Go ahead and do that. Then we're going to add a variable to our JSON object, or add a JSON object rather to our variable from getObjectValue. So we can hop that. Yeah, it did the same thing. It just whips through that while loop. We don't see it. I think we would have to do step into for that to actually walk the while loop, but for us it's not a big deal. The object should have 2 things in it, and it does. So we successfully read in the second object at this point. All right, we added it to our variable. So here's our variable. It should now have 2 things in it. Does. So we have another guy, burn past the comma, read in that last object. Well, what should be the last object. So we got this guy. Let's make sure the object has the stuff in it we expect. He has 2 things. There'd be A and B. There's the A. We can assume that the B is there. So let's hop over that. Return the object. We'll save the object. So right now the variable should have 3 things in it. All right, so we want to analyze where we're currently sitting before I hit next. So we have our 3 different objects in there. And currently, pause is 46, and that's a local variable here. Yeah, we start that off at the current pause, okay? And let's see where we currently sit. Cur pause is 138. That'd be really nice if this could tell me what 138 is. All right, so we're currently sitting at 138, and we're asking the question, what comes next, a comma or a closing square bracket? So we want to see what 138 is, because we're going to get inside this while loop here. It's my prediction. So we'll step. Oh, we didn't. Okay, so that's good. So that guy's working the way it should be working. So now we're going to move past the closing square bracket. Done with that. That's fine. So now we should be sitting right here. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. oh, remember that line we moved? I said it's cool to move it. Totally wasn't cool to move it. Would you agree that we are done with our array at this point? Yeah, so we should probably go ahead and return that array when we're done, as opposed to have it spin back up and keep cooking, because now it's looking for another another opening square bracket, and of course the next one of those opening square brackets is nowhere, hence no pointer exception. All right, so if we move this guy right back up, let's stop the program here. This guy goes back into there. That'll break us out of that loop. So now it should do what we wanted to do. So here's our JSON array. There's 3 objects in it. First guy has 2 elements. Second guy has 2 elements. Third guy has 2 elements. So, and then we get our last variable, which is 4 and 2. Make sense? All right. So punchline with this assignment was, let's go back to this other view here. What was helpful for us is updating our parser to work for one more complex level that was built in terms of other objects. And in order to do that, we had to write a couple of helper functions that actually upgraded our original parser. Okay, so punchline is we wrote 3 functions that were just additions to, well, one of them was an addition to the old function, and 2 little helper functions like this char before char guy, but we had to work within a larger project. So the idea with our assignments here is that we're getting used to working in larger chunks of code that we might have trouble sitting down and writing from scratch, but if given this as a starting point, working with it moving forward shouldn't be too bad as long as it's commented reasonably. And it would be nice if, so I think I've said this before, that I think there's a way to like expand all. Is it folding? Oh yeah, collapse all. There you go. Wasn't I trying to find that one other time? Doesn't that make life a lot easier? So now all these guys are kind of minimized, so if you need to go into exists and see how it works, you can just expand that guy. But as soon as you're happy that that code works, you can compress that, so now navigating through the program is a little bit easier. Okay, so at this point, we have a parser that knows how to parse stuff. Let's go back to our CaveJSON here. And let's take a peek at this guy. So we've decided that our cave looks like a normal JSON object. Do we know how to parse things that look like this? Do we know how to parse things that look like this? And this guy contains what? He contains a collection of, so this room array contains an object followed by another object, but each of those objects contains an array in and of themselves. Make sense? So, do we think that our current parser can handle that? Should be able to. Should be able to. So, let's take a crack at it. So, we're going to change this to our CaveJSON. I saw some red. 221 is where it went out of bounds. Just want to make sure this is properly formed JSON by our parser standards. Let's look at this closer. That's the way it should start. That should be fine, comma. That should be fine. I wonder if it doesn't like this separating into rows, but it should be fine. It should just ignore that. So we'll burn past that. Here's our first object. We're able to handle objects. Here's our second object. We're able to handle objects. There's a comma between, so now let's look at these individual objects. So this guy has something that looks like that. We should be able to handle that. Something that looks like this. We should be able to handle that. Something that looks like this. And now we have another array. which we should be able to handle, which contains an object. And this object has a name value pair, comma, name value pair. All right, so when we get to this comma, after we get this guy, we're asking, does a comma come before a curly brace? It does not, so move past the curly brace. Then we're asking the question, does a comma come before a closing square bracket? It doesn't, so we should move past that guy. Does a comma come before a curly brace? It shouldn't, so we move past that guy. All right, so let's leave our breakpoint in because we're breaking in here, and I suspect it has less to do with us having two arrays, an array inside of an array, but more to do with where the cursor is left here for making this transition right there. That's my suspicion. All right, so we'll step over. Step over. Oh, we immediately die? That wasn't, it was very anticlimactic. All right, let's sort of. Here's my breakpoint right here. We're never getting to that? Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to put our initial we are getting here. We're printing that guy out. Where's our parse? This guy calls get object value. All right, so here is an initial fear. So this is something called regression testing that we're looking at. We had a program that worked. We added a new feature. New feature now works, but potentially old features now broke. So we need to implement what's called regression testing. I'll talk about unit testing at another point in time. We don't cover it in this class, but you cover it in software engineering next semester. But the punchline is that there's this concept called unit testing where we would have a whole bunch of like pre-built tests that we would put together. So you've kind of seen how we've been kind of trial and erroring our code, running tests through it and saying, oh, okay, it works. It seems to do what it's supposed to be doing. Where really we should be building those tests formally inside of a unit test so that when we think our code is good, before we try it on real data, we actually run it through all our unit tests and make sure it passes all those tests. And then when we hit a weird little quirky bug and we go and fix that, we add a unit test to test against that bug. So now if we used to have 8 unit tests, now we have 9 unit tests. So every single time we make a change, we run it through our unit tests, and our unit tests are a growing list of things that we need to make sure our code works for. So that kind of ensures that we don't fix something new and break something old. So that's my suspicion here, is that we've broken something old. So this get initial object value, my guess is this is where this guy is crashing. So let me throw a breakpoint here. Let's walk through this. Okay, so there's that guy. So we're at the parse object. Let's step into that. So now we're there. Why? Simple JSON. Oh. This is the problem. See that double quote there? He looks different than these double quotes here. Didn't we paste this in from TextEdit? This is actually kind of a common problem. So we go back. So let's do this, copy that, find this guy, replace him with this guy. So we'll do replace all. And then let's find this guy and replace him with the other guy, like that. See, do we have anything else in there that'll break? It's actually kind of good we bumped into that. That's actually kind of a common thing when you copy and paste stuff from things that add format, that you sometimes run into issues. So now we're going to act all confident and pretend like this is just going to work, no harm, no foul. So let's see if that's the case. We're just going to run it normally, not through the debugger. All right, so we have a JSON object. Actually, why don't we look like it worked, but let's just confirm. Bring this guy up so we can kind of reference. So we have a single JSON object, and this JSON object has two variables, right? Start room ID and rooms. Those are the two variables that are in there. So the first one is a number, start room ID. The second guy is a JSON array. Okay, that JSON array has two objects in it. The first object, actually, do I not actually print out the value of an array, the variable name associated with it? Not the end of the world, that's just part of my display method. But so this guy has two objects in this array. So we're right here. The first object has three things in it. That's going to be ID is 0, name is cave entrance, and then the third guy, yeah, we don't say exits here either. So oh, I bet you we have that in, we must have that in double quotes. Let's just fix that real quick so we have some sanity. JSON array, num objects. That's a variable. Let's see, here's our JSON array, num objects. That's funny, yeah. I don't know, because we copied it in from object, and object works differently. An object never has a name. It always has a collection of values. Actually, is that true? Hold on. Oh no, our object is broken too. Well, not broken, but oh, a JSON object doesn't have a name. A JSON object variable does have a name. So our objects are okay. The problem is that we copied our display method for array from JSON object. JSON objects never have names. JSON arrays always have names because they're array variables, so we just need to fix this guy up here. So this is going to be a JSON array whose name is, let's just do that, concatenated with this dot name, concatenated with space, something like that. Put a little arrow in there maybe. Yeah, good enough. At the very least it'll look better to us and we'll know that we're reading the right crap. Okay, so now we have our initial JSON object with two variables in it. We have our start room, that's value is 0. We have our array named rooms that has two objects in it. The first object in there is this guy right here, and he has 3 elements. The first element is a ID. Second one is a name, the cave entrance. The third one is an array named exits. So there's exits. Only one object inside there. It's a JSON object, it has two variables in it, whose first one is name is north, second one is destination ID is 1. Okay, perfect. Then we have our JSON object, so our second JSON object here, which is a, it doesn't have a name because it's a second element inside of our array. And inside of this guy, this object has 3 elements. It has an ID is 1. A name should be room 2. Where are we at here? Name is room 2. And then an exit, which is going to be a JSON array. So here's our exits, JSON array. Inside there, the number of objects is 1. So 1 object for our exits. And that object's going to have 2 values associated with it. One is a name, south, and one is the destination ID, 0. All right, finish the array, finish the object. All right, so this seemed like we have now a compatible parser for CaveJSON. See, easy peasy. All right, so pretty complicated code there for JSON parsing. The good news is that most languages have JSON parsers built into them, but since we wrote one ourselves and it works, why don't we go ahead and use it? So I'm going to go ahead and close like a lot of this stuff since we don't need to have, actually let's just do this, close all, and then we'll just reopen what we need. All right, so now that we have the ability to parse something, and what we're actually doing is we're displaying our JSON object. So really, after we have our parser, we're going to have a JSON object. We'll call this guy the cave, and he's going to be the result of calling parse on our JSON. Okay, so now we have a JSON object representation of our cave that we've kind of sucked into our program out of that string. Converted our JSON string back into JSON or into objects. What if we wanted to go the other direction? So now I have a JSON object that contains a collection of things, right? Things that are in there are going to be JSON variables. And a JSON object is a collection of JSON variables, and our JSON variables come in 4 flavors. Okay. So what if I now wanted to have something like this in row? We'll just assume everything's fine. All right, so let's go into JSON objects. So right now, JSON object knows how to display itself. But what if we wanted to give it the capability to go the other direction? That is, take a JSON object, Java object, that's a collection of JSON variables, and ask that guy to turn himself back into JSON string. The reason why we might want to do this is, let's say in our game, eventually when we're playing our actual game, what if we have the ability to construct our world? See, wouldn't you agree that if you're building a giant cave here and you're writing it by hand like this, things are going to get pretty tedious pretty fast? So wouldn't it be cooler if we could just go into, so almost like Minecrafty, right? Just go into our cave entrance, our starting cave, and once we're in there, we could just be in edit mode. So maybe as an administrator, we have a couple of commands that normal players don't have, and we can build a room to the west. We can build a room to the east. And then what we can do is then save the cave, and it'll export it as JSON and maybe overwrite the original file. So now we have a bigger world. Does that make sense? Okay. So in order to do that, we need to have our JSON object representation. So the thing we have now, this is this is good. We have half the structure. We need to be able to spit that back out into JSON. You think that's going to be difficult? Sounds intimidating, right? Well, let's start taking a look at it. It's actually going to be far simpler than what we just did. Okay? Far, 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 far simpler. So we'll go into our JSON object, and what does it mean for a JSON object to be, what does a JSON object look like? It's a sandwich, right? So let's just open up our CaveJSON again. This whole thing is a JSON object, isn't it? Here's the first piece of bread. Here's the closing piece of bread. Everything in between can handle itself. This is a variable. This is a variable. This is a variable. So on and so forth. Okay? So at the very least, from a JSON object's perspective, for him to turn himself into a export to JSON, we're going to say string answer starts off as the curly brace, because all JSON objects start off with the curly brace, right? Then answer plus equals closing curly brace, because all JSON objects have a closing curly brace at the end. Then we have to build the sandwich in between. And what's in that sandwich? An array of variables. We can ask each variable to give us the JSON version of himself. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than this dot cur size, I plus plus, because there's cur size number of objects in here. What will we do? We're going to say answer plus equals this dot the variables at bucket I dot export to JSON. So we're going to teach all of our variables how to export themselves to JSON. Oh, is it because I was writing all this while we were still in the debugger? I think that was it. That's fine. All right. Now, we need to teach a JSON variable how to export to JSON. Now, JSON variables by default don't know how to do much, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our JSON variable. And we're going to create an abstract method that returns a string, and it's going to be called exportToJSON, like this. So now all variables know how to export themselves to JSON. All right? So we're going to have several errors in here, notice, because all of our JSON variable types now are expected to implement this guy, but currently don't. So I'm going to write the first one, simple one. So our JSON string guy, I'll hover over this. We'll go ahead and add the unimplemented methods. Okay, this guy expects a string to be returned. So a JSON variable, so this is a JSON string variable, looks like that. Is that correct? That's what a JSON string variable looks like that. So what do I need to do? I need to take the name, put double quotes around it, concatenate on a colon, take the value, double quotes around it, return it. So here's our JSON string variable. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to return a string. The string we're going to return is going to be that says the backslash character says treat this as a double quote, not as the beginning or end of a string. Okay, so that will hard code that guy in there. Concatenated with this dot name, concatenated with closing curly brace, or closing double quote, concatenated with a colon, followed by another double quote, concatenated with this dot value, concatenated with another closing double quote. That's what a name value pair looks like. We've surrounded name by an opening double quote and a closing double quote. We've separated it by a colon. We've surrounded value by an opening double quote and a closing double quote. And we returned that string. That is the JSON version of a string variable. All right? So as long as we solve the problem in a compartmentalized fashion like this problem is actually pretty easy. You know, as an example, where are we going next? Let's say we're in JSON. Well, we already started writing this in JSON Object. I just need to return answer here at the end. Let me just do that right now, just so we don't forget, so that guy will stop screaming. So, as an example, talking ahead for your homework, what will we do inside of our function for JSON Array variable? It's a sandwich. Opening square bracket, closing square bracket, loop through all the objects, tell each of those objects to export themselves to JSON. Make sense? Over and over and over again. So this is going to be far, far, far easier. Okay, so for homework for Tuesday, I'll push this up to GitHub and I'll leave the errors in there. That way you'll be able to go into each of these guys and click and say, add unimplemented method. So it'll go ahead and drop that method in there for you. Make our JSON object be able to export itself to a JSON string. Okay? This one should be substantially easier, but it should feel intimidating. Okay, so I'll go ahead and push that up to GitHub, and I will see everybody on Tuesday.